Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers podcast. Hello, and welcome to me, Phil Craig, at the Australian Bar, and another episode of the Scandal Mongers podcast. Are you feeling festive? That's the question, because we haven't got our tree up. But the first stage in the Craig family Christmas, really cheap liqueur chocolates from Poundland, Britain's premier retailer of really cheap things. And you know what? They're gorgeous. And yes, Mrs. Craig has delivered these from the branch of Poundland near where her library is. So I think by the time I see you again, if I ever see you again, the whole place will be decorated for Christmas. But it's the 5th of December, Friday morning. No Christmas here, but I am up early. It's very early. I'm looking out at the frost on the car. And it looks very, very, very Christmassy. Actually, it's kind of white dusting of frost on the pavements and the gardens. Spiders' webs all frozen out there. And behind me, it's the Ashes cricket. Yep, I've been up since 4:30 watching the Ashes, and once again, England are in trouble. And we lost the first test. We're struggling in the second, but you know this is what it's like. If you're an England cricket fan, we always lose in Australia, but we always have hope because sometimes we win. Well, the last time was 15 years ago. And then the time before that was the 80s. So it's hard because the Australians are rather good at cricket, especially when it's played in Australia. But it's kind of magical to be up early watching something from the other side of the world, in this case, Brisbane. Yeah, so hello. It's part 2 of Panorama with Andy Webb, where we get into the details of the cover-up, which is the part of it that really obsesses me, I have to say. But before that, I thought I'd share something else that's a little bit festive, and maybe a bit more fun than all this heavy stuff about Diana. I watched 2 things, actually, that featured Harry and Meghan this week on the telly, and it gave me thoughts I thought I'd share with you, because we haven't talked about them for a while. And I know that lots of you are really interested. Her Christmas special on Netflix. Have you seen it? I mean, really. I think I've talked before about her series, how kind of oily and insincere it is, but they've taken it to a new level in this Christmas special. It is completely unfathomable. I mean, it's like you take all the things that we did at primary school, you know, crafty things, like making Christmas decorations, and then you kind of smother it in lots of kind of California speak with wellness tips. And then you invite various people who you say are your friends into your house, although it's a rented house. And most of them look kind of confused about why they're even there. And so one of them at least looked desperate to leave. And then you talk about making these crafty things and then cakes and decorating, and everything is so kind of like, I don't know, I wrote one line down where she said, try placing the raw broccoli in a circle around the dips. And she said it as if she was delivering some kind of religious testimony. The Sermon on the Mount, I mean, it's all so serious and so heavy-handed. And yeah, she does gift wrapping, where she advises you to fold the paper outwardly, not inwardly, because that'll be an unexpected touch. And it's all just too much. I mean, what's wrong with a bit of sellotape? You know, why can't a tree be a tree? Her tree is an encapsulation of my family's journey. Yeah, okay, so that made me think, do you know, also happening this week, Megan, your father is in hospital having an operation and he's apparently seriously ill. And you're kind of hanging out with these celebrities who you don't really know, talking kind of gobbledygook about your family's journey. And actually, that's your family. And you don't talk to him. And it looks like he's in big trouble health-wise. So that was a bit sad. But I mean, it's actually quite comic. I would recommend you watch it. Watch it after a few drinks with a friend. Because the absolute highlight or the low light is when this tennis player, Naomi Osaka, turns up. And she I don't know, she looks like she can't wait to get back to her volleying practice. And Megan says to her that she finds following the children around the house and cleaning up after them is soul-filling. And you're thinking, yeah, it's soul-filling for the nanny, maybe, Megan. But yeah, what else? I mean, I could go on. Elevating the everyday. That's the theme. You can make everyday things like an ordinary packet of cheap liqueur chocolates, and you can elevate them. Somebody said actually on one of the blogs I follow about television, said the baking segment of this show was like somebody had asked ChatGPT how to overcomplicate a cake. Oh dear. So yeah, It's weird because the highlight then, the other highlight is at the end. Harry appears. Thank you for coming, she says, as if she's just met him. I mean, really, yes, she greets the guests, who she doesn't really know, with more sincerity, I think. Anyway, he turns up from the cupboard in which she's had him locked up, and makes a few comments about salad. And, he just looks like he doesn't know why he's there. And I just thought, give the poor man a Marks and Spencer's mince pie. Don't have to elevate it. A badly wrapped bottle of tequila, and let him have a nice Christmas. Because this is all too much. And yeah, too much. Lovey-dovey, fake, gushing, too much. Yeah, so that was my feeling about Meghan. But then you see Harry was on telly. Harry was on the telly on the Stephen Colbert show. Did you see it? I thought he was actually rather good. He made an appearance in this kind of quite clever parody of a cheesy Christmas special. Hang on, Meghan just made a cheesy Christmas special. But anyway, this was a cheesy Christmas special in the Hallmark tradition, girl meets handsome prince in unexpected circumstances. And he turned up and he played it. He was good, actually. He looked like he was enjoying himself. He delivered the lines. He made a gag about Trump being a king. And the audience naturally, Stephen Colbert's audience, naturally booed. And I thought, well, I mean, it's all done in good spirit, I suppose. But it did make me think a little bit, both that and the Meghan thing, about what was happening here in England this week with the royals. The life that he gave up. And I don't know if you saw, there was a big state visit from the German president. And Charles was on great form. He was talking in German. They arranged these wonderful parades, and of course, this fantastic state banquet. William and Catherine were there looking terrific. Lots of chit chat. And, that's the job. And that's the job of a royal, if you don't mind doing what the firm does. And sometimes you have to make nice to people you don't maybe like. I'm not sure they love the German president, but you think of Trump. I don't think Charles thinks much of Trump, but, it's his job to make nice to people who are important and not to identify yourselves with one side of politics. Well, Harry and Meghan have been doing that for a long time. We understand. But I just sort of think, wouldn't Harry rather be there deep down? And they could use him. Charles is ill. Andrew is in exile, in internal exile, fearing the fraud squad's going to come knocking on his door, which they probably, well, they should, I reckon. They're a bit light, they're a bit short of staff. And you think, where could he be? Well, I tell you where he could be. I reckon he and Meghan could be in Australia right now doing a tour. They'd be claimed. They could do all sorts of worthwhile things. They could hang out with the cricketers. It'd be terrific. They could be in Africa. They could be doing serious stuff. And he wants to. You did know that with Harry. I mean, I think you saw that when he was confronted with all the bloody salad and the Christmas nonsense. You think he just has a purpose to him. And yes, he's a rebel, and he finds lots of it insufferable, and maybe the problems will never be surmountable. I don't know. But it seems sad to me that they're not doing that important stuff that was kind of his birthright. And that is actually quite good at. Instead, they're doing this inconsequential, insincere, nonsense, really. Not the comedy appearance. I mean, I guess Meghan's show. Is that really what they thought they were doing when they went into exile, doing this stuff? I mean, they're kind of a laughingstock, I think, really. At least she is with that programme. And I mean, earlier in the year, there were all these talk about there was going to be a rapprochement, maybe around the Invictus Games. I don't know, that's gone very quiet. Some kind of semi-apology or some kind of agreement, agree to differ, and Harry will do some royal duties, perhaps without her, I don't know. But I just look at them now and I think that is actually quite sad, what they're doing, when you consider what they could be doing. But that was always my feeling about all this whole breakup. And I've always hoped they could patch it up, though I think increasingly that's not looking as likely as it perhaps was. I don't know why. Anyway, so that's my morning thoughts, influenced by watching too much cheesy TV and the cricket at 4 a.m. So a little bit spaced out. I'm also on painkillers for my leg. Yes, my leg. I had the scan finally. For those who are following Phil's health journey, it's my journey, my health journey. It is a slip disc. I had the MRI and I got the thing, and it's the famous L4, L5, which for those of you who've ever had anything like this, that's the one that tends to go. My doctor says that adults are not meant to be sitting upright all the time. in chairs like this. And I guess the last 3 years, I mean, I was never the most active person. I was skiing in March, but I have done a lot of sitting, working on my books, and I need maybe to think about a standing desk or some kind of ergonomic. I'm sure some of you will have ideas. Some change to the ergonomics, but also I might need an operation. I'm going to see a surgeon. Doctor thinks maybe 30% that you need the op. A friend of mine had a similar thing, same vertebrae, L4, L5, and she had to have the op. The others say you can get around it with time and exercise. I don't know. I've had it over a month. It's really annoying me. And the combination of the painkillers and the cricket and watching Megan, I feel a bit spacey because they're opioids, the ones I'm on. They're the big ones, the good, the powerful ones. So I have had a few moments where I felt a bit like that jet lag feeling, a little bit floaty. Hopefully I haven't come across too floaty. Maybe it's just the rum liqueur chocolates. Anyway, I'm going to dig into these and leave you with Andy. I mean, you know the story. All last week's show was about the build-up to the interview, how Patrick Jephson was sidelined, how Martin Bashir wormed his way into Diana's confidence, told her the most remarkable series of stories about how she was going to get murdered and Camilla was going to get murdered and the nanny was pregnant and she shouldn't trust anybody because they were all being paid by her enemies, all this stuff. Interviews got out. It's a global sensation. Biggest scoop? Well, one of the great scoops of all time. But the BBC soon has a problem. And how will they handle it? Well, Andy will be on right now to tell you all about it. And I will see you at the end. Thank you for your patience. And very nice for you to join me on this pre-Christmas, pre-festive, liqueur chocolate only version of the podcast. Or the next time you see me, there'll be a tree, I promise. Okay, see you soon. Thank you, bye. Well, Andy, welcome back for part 2. And actually, in a way, much more important than part 1, because you've explained how the interview with Diana was secured, how it took place. We all know massive impact. I was working in current affairs at the time. As you know, I was a former friend of Martin's and a then friend of several people on the Panorama team. I think within about a week, I heard stories that all was not well on Panorama. And maybe you could pick up the story from there, what you discovered about what was going on behind the scenes, the first people to raise objections, and how the BBC responded.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to assume here, Phil, aren't we? I think that your viewers and listeners are, I'll put it, reasonably well into the weeds. So there's only so much sort of background explanation one needs to do. Yeah, what happened was that Matt Wiesler, the name will be familiar. Matt was the very nice guy. Matt, very nice guy, brought into all this, against his, he didn't really know what was happening. But anyway, Matt had seen the Panorama interview go out. He'd begun to put 2 and 2 together because the interview appears in November. Back at the end of August, he had mysteriously been asked by Martin Bashir to produce these 2 fake bank statements. Matt knew that they were fakes, but he had no idea that they were going to be used for nefarious purposes. Matt saw the interview go out, and I put it in, as I put it in the book, a chill went down his spine because he thought, oh no, these documents must have something to do with the fact that Martin Bashir has been able to get the journalistic scoop of the century, Diana. So Matt then goes to, the first thing Matt does, I was going to say he was going to the beat, but no, the first thing that Matt did was contact somebody who you will know, Phil, a Panorama producer called Markle,
Yep.
who had worked with both Matt and Martin Bashir on previous programs. Matt faxed copies of the fake bank statements, which he still had in his possession, simply because they were slightly imperfect in the printing process. The best copies, the clean copies, the master copies had, of course, been given to Martin Bashir back at the end of August. Matt Wiesler, fortunately, had 2 copies that had just been sort of rejected because they weren't quite spot on. He faxed these to Mark Killick and said, Mark, look, Martin Bashir asked me to make these things. We've got the interview now with, Diana, what's going on? Mark Killick was, and I've spoken to Mark about this, he was, he smelt a rat straight away. And the reason he smelt a rat is because the bank statements which Bashir had got Matt to produce were just too good to be true. Anybody, our own bank statements, there's like a million entries, there's 10.99 to Amazon, there's 30 quid to have your exhaust fiddled with, there's this, that, and the other, right? These bank statements, there were just two entries. Payments from effectively newspaper group X to Mr. blah, 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 4,000 quid, and then another payment, 6,500 from such and such. And Markle thought, no, that isn't how, life is never that. He said it screamed out at you. They said, look at me, da, 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 da. Where was the 10.99 for the the toilet roll or this from B&Q? So he was suspicious right away. He then... he actually confronted Martin Bashir in the canteen at the BBC. He, I forget the exact date, November. It was just days after the Panorama interview had gone out, and he said, "Martin, look, what's these? These are fake, they're clearly fake bank statements. Matt Wiesler says you got him, and da da da." And Bashir was very, very, very worried, but also cross and antagonistic, and said, it's nothing to do with you, nothing to do with you. You've got to take it up with the editor if you're going to take it up. Steve Hewlett was then the editor of Panorama. Anyway, a few days go by. Mark Killick then, a week went by, and Mark Killick then went to Tom Mangold, who again is somebody that you will know. Tom Mangold.
Worked with Tom, worked with Mark. Tom was even then a kind of veteran BBC reporter of a great seniority and experience.
Absolutely. I mean, a huge respect for Tom, who is, fortunately still with us. I think now he's made 120 panoramas is his tally, which is an extraordinary thing. And his career goes right back to the 1950s, Fleet Street, etc. Anyway, Mark Killick then takes these statements to Tom Mangold and says, Tom, what do you think, Tom, with all your vast experience? Why fake bank statements have been They, the two of them, then went in to see Steve Hewlett, and Tom tells me that Steve Hewlett's response was, and I don't know whether you use bleeps, Phil, but if you do, get them ready, because Steve Hewlett's response was he told them to fuck off.
Now, this is interesting because I think I mentioned in our last conversation, you said it was the BBC of the Armani suits, but Steve Hewlett was a bit rougher. He was the leather jacket guy. He was a bit more tabloid. I mean, in his background, he wasn't, but he wanted to play with those boys in that world. And yes, he had a rough edge to him. Steve and I had a slight falling out ourselves over a programme a few years before. But this is a big moment. He's the editor of Panorama. It's just secured the biggest scoop of his career, perhaps of the BBC's history. The future Queen of England going on about her husband's affairs, saying he's not fit to be king. Global sensation. Somebody comes up to raise an objection. This is a big moment. Why didn't he take them seriously?
Exactly. I mean, I think the response at that point, would it not be, if this is news to the editor, and we must say here that, Steve Hewlett, he died in 2017. He's not around to make his case. If there's a case to be made, he's not around, and that has to be said. But still, these are the questions I think that arise. So let's say that this is the first time you've heard about this. And
do you think it was the first time he'd heard about it?
Well, I think Steve Hewlett's response indicates that it's not, because I can say, so Tom Mangold, the very experienced, seasoned veteran reporter, a very highly respected producer, walk into your office and say, look, Steve, it appears that one of our reporters over there has been commissioning forged documents. And your response, the editor's response at that point would surely be, hang on, what did you say? Bring what? Oh my God, what's happened? It wasn't that. It was, in fact, this is none of your fucking business, is what Tom Mangold tells me. So clearly at that point, it seems to me that Steve Hewlett was aware of something that had gone on, and he felt that it was none of the fucking business of other people in the office. So that's what's happening as regards the coalface, if you like, the producers and reporters on Panorama. Matt Wiesler, Matt was now no longer a staffer on Panorama. He's a freelancer. He's literally just weeks beforehand established a small freelance graphic operation with a partner, Patrick Bedeau. Their offices are actually in Bond Street, believe it or not. So Matt isn't within the office, so he's not immediately aware of what's sort of happening there. What then happens is this extraordinary event, which again I detail in the book, that Matt's apartment in Camden is broken into. There's a burglary. And the only thing that is missing is throw another log on the fire, granddad, a floppy disk, which some people might, what is a floppy disk? A floppy disk 30 years ago was a sort of little miniature external hard drive, if you like, just storing a little bit of data. And on one of these floppy disks, Matt had kept the digital information, the data, which he used to create the bank statement. Anyway, Matt comes home from work one evening. I will add this bit of detail because it's to me, it's sort of fascinating. Anyway, Matt rushes home. He's dying for a pee. He rushes up the steps to his apartment, rushes into the bathroom. And what does he see in the toilet bowl except a giant floating turd, right? Now, I think this is such a kind of poetic symbol because this in many ways began the scandal began to break loose. And it was when Matt saw that giant turd that he knew stuff bad was happening. And what had happened...
Somebody's broken into his flat, left a rather unpleasant memento, stolen. I mean, this is weird. I'm guessing the police never found out who did that.
Well, Matt did not actually report his burglary to the police. There was a second burglary, which was Matt didn't report his burglary. And I said, well, why not, Matt? And he said, I mean, quite reasonably, actually, was this, that let's say he goes to the police, he reports it, they say, oh, Mr. Wiesel, that's terrible. What was on these what was on this floppy disk, Mr. Wiesler? And if he then says, well, it was actually it was some forgeries I was making,
Of course.
Forgeries. Okay, so Matt decided not to go there.
So do you think somebody was just trying to warn him off?
Well, let me just say why this became so serious was because 7 days later, there was another burglary at the home of Mark Killick, the chap we've just mentioned, the producer to whom Matt had faxed copies. So there's burglary at Matt's place, burglary at Mark Killick's place. You say, well, who was doing it? Matt ran through, if you like, a sort of list of who might have done it. And there's sort of three people on that list. Top of it, the most obvious one, you might think, oh, well, this is obviously somebody from the BBC, maybe Martin Bashir or somebody hired by Martin Bashir in order to kind of clean up and grab the data. But when you think about that, it makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever because Martin Bashir and certain people at the BBC, they know for a fact that the hard evidence, the actual copies of the bank statements are already out in the open. That horse has well and truly bolted. The bank statements have been sent to somebody else. People know they exist. So what purpose is possibly served by gaining possession by burglary of the floppy disk with the data on? Well, no purpose whatsoever. And also, if Martin Bashir, and it must be said, there is no evidence whatsoever that Martin Bashir was involved in this burglary. If he had have had an interest in the burglary, well, he is the one person in the world who would know that the floppy didn't contain anything of interest apart from, the data for the bank statements, which are already out there. So I think it's safe to say that I can't see a reason why the BBC would be behind that burglary. You then say to yourself, who else? Well, maybe unscrupulous journalists. Let's think of a newspaper which doesn't exist anymore. So we can say, let's say the News of the World decided they felt there was a story here and they're
Well,
going to hire.
rumours were circulating. Really, I mean, I think Mark Killick and Tom Mangle did begin to speak to their friends, of which I was
Yeah,
one, and also to other journalists, because we know the Daily Mail get onto the story. Fair, I'm rushing ahead a bit. The Daily Mail get onto the story, so other journalists would have been aware that something was up. So maybe
they would, Phil, but it seems to me, and Matt and I, we sort of discussed this. Let's say that a newspaper decides to hire a burglar to go in and do it and grab the floppy disk. But what then happens? Well, they're in business to publish stories. So do you not kind of put your hand up if you're the only newspaper on the block to have the story about what's on the floppy disk, and the floppy disk has just been stolen, and people are wondering who stole it? So it seems that possible, but not likely, it seems to me, because simply for that reason, that what use can you openly make of that data, which doesn't immediately point to you as being the person who stole the data? So the third one, which first of all sounds a bit conspiracy theory-ish and kind of swivel-eyed loony-ish, but is this, that there had been so much discussion about Secret Service involvement in these sorts of areas, going back to, the bugging, and then the publication of Diana's phone calls, Squidgygate, which it's difficult to believe didn't happen without some kind of state intervention. It was such a sophisticated operation, and then the rebroadcast of that phone call. Then you've got Camilla Gate, that's Prince Charles and Camilla, and the discussions of floating tampons and what have you. So it seems, again, quite credible that there was some kind of spook involvement in this. And for me, what's compelling is this, that there had been stories had begun to appear in the press already, indeed before the Panorama interview went out and very soon after it, that somehow Diana had been coached to talk because of information that had been fed to Martin Bashir by MI5, or MI5 in particular. Now, we know, do we not, that inside the security services, there are examples of people kind of going off on one, rogue people leaking information here, doing this, doing that.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems to me that if people within the security services took these news stories which had started to appear half seriously, they might think, indeed, has Officer X been briefing somebody, blah, blah, blah. The only way we're going to find out is we're going to go in there and we're going to get the data and we're going to see if people are named in it. So to me, given that I think it is plausible that there was, in some way, Secret Service interest in these matters, the people who could, I think, very effectively and simply and efficiently go in and take the floppy and take a look, that doesn't seem to me impossible for a moment. I mean, I'm not saying that is what happened, but
it's another. I mean, it's a story of many kind of strange cul-de-sacs and maybe even dead ends. It's really interesting. I don't think I knew those details. But let's just go back to the BBC, because I really want to keep the focus on what happened there, because this is all leading to an internal inquiry that will be launched by Tony Hall. But I mean, before we get to that, I assume it's the Daily Mail story, isn't it, that starts to really shake people up, and then somebody in the BBC says we better look into this. Is that basically the sequence of events?
Yes, I mean it sort of is. I mean the BBC were already very soon, they realized they had to start to look into this, because one of the things that happened very early on was Bashir was tasked to go to Diana and get this note, which people may be somewhat familiar with. It was December the 22nd, I mean 3 days before Christmas Day. Diana was asked to supply a note making it clear that she was not, the note effectively says, I was not shown any documents or given information that I was not previously aware of. I think that the wording of that is hugely significant because why I have a huge problem with this is that Diana, the answer she gives depends on the question that she is asked. Now, when she says, I was not shown documents or told anything I was not previously aware of, that actually could cover a set of circumstances where she has been told that X and Y and Z is the case by Martin Bashir, and then provided with, purported evidence to prove that X, Y, and Z is the case. So she could very cleverly have been persuaded to write a note which doesn't say quite as much as we think it says. If I manage to persuade you that I've been picked as striker for England, and then I produce a document that proves I'm going to be striker for England, the document isn't telling you anything that I haven't sort of told you already. And that's effectively what Diana's
They obviously needed, somebody realized they were in trouble. They needed a letter from Diana to help ward off criticism that they were getting. But they also needed some kind of internal process so they could say, well, we've looked into this, lessons have been learned, let's move on. And that kind of is the thing that held for about 25 years until you got involved in the story. So what was that process?
Well, the process was, they were not conducting an inquiry that they wanted in any way to make public. In fact, they didn't make it public. But okay, let's speed forward. So, stories like this, as I say, with princesses and spies and what have you, those are not stories that are going to remain secret within the building. Steve Hewlett himself described Panorama as a piranha tank, in the nicest possible way, a nest of vipers. Nobody likes to see their colleagues succeed and win awards, really, do they? So it wasn't long before these rumors, inevitably they began to get out of the building. And sure enough, these rumors reached the Mail on Sunday, and they, again, sort of speeding forward, managed to put a story together which established beyond doubt that fake documents had been commissioned. The Mail on Sunday didn't know what had been done with these fake documents, but they knew that some fake bank statements had been produced. Because, of course, Matt Wiesler himself, the man who made these fake documents, didn't know the use to which they had been put. All he knew was that he had been asked to make them. Now, that story alone is pretty sensational story. Why is the BBC in the business of having forged bank statements commissioned? But that's pretty much all that the Mail on Sunday did know. And what they published in a story, it was April the 7th of 1996, front page, and I think there were 3 or 4 pages inside. It read something like Diana's BBC man's fake bank statements. So it sounded, wow, something dodgy's gone on there, but it wasn't entirely clear what had gone on there. And of course, the BBC management were absolutely intent on the public not finding out what had gone on there. Because at that point in history, in April of 1996, BBC management knew 3 critically important things. Their inquiry, the internal inquiry, was described by Lord Dyson as being woefully ineffective. Now, I would actually take issue with that. The BBC inquiries were rather effective. They had nailed Bashir. They had nailed him. They nailed him. They knew the 3 things they knew by April was this. They knew that forgeries had been commissioned by Bashir. They knew that Bashir had deployed his forgeries, i.e., he had shown them, not to Diana, but to Charles Spencer, and passed them off as genuine. So they know he's had forgeries made. They didn't know he's used his forgeries, and they knew But when questioned by themselves internally, he had 3 times lied about it. So they knew that there was something going on here. Bashir didn't have a ready answer. He didn't have an honest answer. He lied about it 3 times, and then he admitted that he did.
By the way, did they know that he'd spoken about Charles wanting to have Diana killed, Camilla killed, the nanny's pregnant? Did they know any of that?
No, my belief, and it must only be a belief, because of course the truth about that is something that would be privy to Martin Bashir and indeed certain executives still alive, now retired, but certain executives at the BBC. Possibly Martin Bashir made a full confession. Maybe he broke down and told those bosses, yeah, it's terrible. I've said this, I've said that, I've said the other. We don't know that. But in a sense, we don't have to know that, because what we do know beyond the least doubt is that BBC managers knew those 3 key things: that forgeries had been commissioned, they had been deployed, and that Bashir had lied about.
And now this is the heart of it, because at that point, had they written to Diana to say, we're very sorry, some bad things have happened, that might have affected the course of her life, because she, as we know, at this point still believes everything Martin has said about Patrick Jephson being a traitor and a spy and all the rest of it. So the BBC could have fessed up to Diana at this point. They didn't. In fact, as I believe, and I'm sure you'll tell me whether I'm right, their own press officers were slagging off the whistleblowers, Mark Killick and all the rest of them, Tom Mangold, by telling journalists, these are jealous colleagues. These are people who are just trying to stab a successful colleague in the back because they wish they'd have got the scoop of the century. And that's what happened, really, isn't it?
I think it is. And we know for a fact that his title then was Director News, Tony Hall. We know for a fact that what he said to the BBC Board of Governors was that, Matt Wiesler, the whistleblower, he was to be blacklisted. He would never work for the BBC again. And the phrase that Tony Hall used was that troublemakers and leakers would be, I think even the rather sinister phrase, would be dealt with. I mean, it sounds vaguely Stalinist, didn't it? So that is what he passed on to the Board of Governors at a meeting where he, on the one hand, described Martin Bashir as being honest and honourable. He made it clear that the whistleblower would be blacklisted and the leakers and troublemakers would be dealt with.
And as he sat at that meeting, he knew that Bashir had lied.
He knew that Bashir had forgeries made, had used the forgeries, and had lied about it. I mean, that is what he knew, no doubt whatsoever. I don't, as I say, I don't really believe that Tony Hall did know about the death threat, the death plot Prince Charles had, and the fate watch that Prince William's supposed to have had, and the coming abdication of the Queen. I don't think he knew about all those things, but he didn't have to. He didn't have to know about those things to exercise a duty of care to a member of the public, be she a princess or the brother of a princess, or the lady who works on the checkout at Tesco. One would have a duty of care.
So an argument has been created here that held for a long time until you started your work quite a few years later, and it went something like this. We're proud of the interview. It was a scoop. Diana has told us that she was happy to give it. She wasn't influenced by any dodgy documents. And then later they said to me, because I interviewed Tony Hall in 2002 about this. He said, yes, we now accept, this is 2002, that Bashir went too far. He no longer works for the BBC, but we still believe it was a credible piece of work that we're proud of. So proud, we're about to make a film for the 10th anniversary, saying how clever we all were. And that Diana herself was quite happy. So please go away, Mr. Craig, because I did. I wasn't as tenacious as you, Andy Webb. I sort of swallowed that, I suppose. And that really was the cover story, wasn't it, that they created?
It was because the BBC then had. I'm absolutely convinced that they were constructing a kind of, legally defensible position whereby it was just about a really, really rickety and flimsy house of cards, but nonetheless, one that if you didn't blow too hard on it, it would just about remain standing. For instance, Martin Bashir was asked by Tony Hall to explain, Martin, why did you want these fake bank statements in the first place? And the answer that Martin Bashir provided, which Tony Hall says he fully accepted, was that Martin wanted these forged bank statements for his personal research folder. That he was working on a story, looking at the possible possible tabloids paying money to people close to Diana. Martin had become aware of this story, and just so he didn't forget it, so he never forgot what he'd been told, he rushed to Camden in the middle of the night, got Matt Wiesler to make him these beautifully produced forgeries, put them with a motorcycle courier to be delivered to him at Heathrow Airport because he wanted them for his research folder. Okay. Martin, why did you show your forgeries to the brother of Princess Diana? The answer came back from Martin Bashir. Well, Tony, I don't really know. In Martin's words, it was to cement the relationship. So,
Amazing.
Yeah, he's there at Althorpe and he's doing this. I mean, the other issue in this, Phil, which is absolutely critical, and I don't think, I honestly don't think that the Dyson report looked at this closely enough. And your listeners and viewers have to really sort of keep their, thinking caps on here. And the timing when these fake bank statements were produced is utterly, utterly critical. Because Martin Bashir's story remains that they were produced, I think he says they were made in October of 1995. And the date is relevant because by that stage, he's already met Princess Diana. He's already talking with Princess Diana. They're all mates by now. At the point at which he says he got the bank statements made, we're very, very far down the line. The Panorama interview is only a couple of weeks away. So he says he told Tony Hall that they were done really, really late in the process. In fact, we know that they were made at the very end of August, I think actually on the night of August the 30th, at a point before Bashir has even met Princess Diana. He's never even met her yet. Now, Tony Hall, to say that he believed Martin Bashir's version of the story, has also to accept the later, the production of these bank statements later in the timeline, October. Yet we have a document from this chap called Tim Gardam, who was a BBC executive, who first got from Bashir the admission of what he'd done with his statements. And in the Tim Gardam memo, it says the documents were produced in, it says August/September. It was the very end of August, the very beginning of September. And as we know, it was August 30th. So Tony Hall Mr. Hall, how was it possible for you to accept the story that you were being told by Martin Bashir that he got these things made in October, late in the process, when at the same time you've been told they were made in August/September? Because if you believe they're made in August/September, they can't be what they say. The other thing is this, Phil. They were delivered to Heathrow Airport by a BBC courier. So at the point in history where this is an issue, in the spring of 1996, it would have been a moment's work to simply look at the files and say,
He
did
didn't
a,
want to find out. I mean, I think this is the
well,
thing
that seems to be the
this is the
case.
thing that they didn't want to know what would really happen because it would unravel their amazing scoop
I
they were
think
building their careers on, all of them.
yeah,
And that clearly is what your book has exposed. That
it is. I
they
think
were
it's even worse than
incurious.
not wanting to know what happened. I'd say it is not credible to believe that certain BBC managers believed what they say they believed. It just is not credible that they
This
could
is
have
why
believed that.
I had my conversation with Hewlett. I mentioned this to you before. A couple of years later, 2004, in Sydney, lots of drink had been taken. He and I, we had a difficult relationship. He knew I was friends with some of the whistleblowers, but we found ourselves in a bar together, completely by chance, actually, mutual friends. And we talked and we talked and we talked. And first of all, I got the normal thing. Maybe Martin cut a few corners, but it was a terrific scoop. Most of us would have done the same. And Mangold and all the others were just jealous, backstabbers. That was his position then. But he also led me to believe that he didn't know the full details of what had happened and what Martin had done, and that one day that might come up and bite them all on the bum, which I think might have been the phrase he used. That's what I came away thinking, that he knew there was something that might yet come out. And actually, you know what it was, which is Charles Spencer's notes, because Charles Spencer is currently at this point is sitting on those notes. He hasn't revealed them to anybody. Maybe that's because he doesn't want to, embarrass himself and people think
There's that, but what's also critical to remember, I've spoken to Charles Spencer at length about this, is he was not approached by BBC during their so-called inquiry in the spring of 1996. I mean, no, they didn't. They didn't telephone him and say, "By the way, Earl Spencer, something terrible's happening. Can we talk about it?" They didn't do that. They didn't contact him. But it wasn't so much they didn't contact him for fear of what he might tell them. It was for fear of what they would have to tell him.
Yeah.
Because at that point, they would have to say, "Earl Spencer, good to get you on the phone. I've just got to say to you that one of our chaps has been using forgeries, and he came to you with some." And because Spencer did not know that the documents he'd been shown by Bashir, he had suspicion that Bashir was a kind of bit of a weirdo, and in his words, what he'd been told was he was full of crap. But what he didn't know was that this guy had actually had very sophisticated forgeries made and shown them to. If he'd have known that, then I suspect you'd have had to hold him down to go and get Diana and say, "Hey, God, some da da da." The BBC were very careful not to let.
That's really interesting. Yes, I think that sounds exactly right. Gosh.
Yeah,
But of course,
it was.
he is sitting on these notes that you end up getting your hands on years later. All the remarkable things that Martin had said about Tiki Legborg and assassinations. I mean, a lot of people must have asked you this. Why do you think he kept those private? Was it for fear of embarrassing them all, that they fell for such nonsense, or?
Well, I think, and again, obviously, this is something I've talked with him about. First of all, you've got to put yourself in Spencer's position. He has, at the time around the Panorama interview, a really well-founded kind of loathing of the press because, the tabloids at that time, the Sun and the Today and all these people, they're all getting whatever story they can. His life at that time is pretty colourful, and he is being absolutely pursued. I mean, he's actually moving to South Africa, partly to get away from tabloid intrusion, which I think, they were incredibly intrusive. At the very time we're talking about, he was involved in a big libel action against the Daily Express. He'd made claims about which are thoroughly unfounded, and he won the libel action, etc. So he's not really the sort of person who's going to, respond when if a newspaper says, "Hey, Spencer, what about this?" But he absolutely would have responded to the BBC contacting him. And in fact, in the book, I mean, there's this fascinating little bit aside that one of the BBC executives actually leading the inquiry at the time, a chap called Tim Souter, he'd shared a house with Charles Spencer for 3 months. They'd been housemates for 3 months. When do you remember that bit in the book, Phil, when Spencer was at Eton, just about to leave Eton, 18 years old, and was living outside Eton in what was charmingly called a colony of beaks, a colony of beaks, a beak being a
teacher
at Eton. Tim Souter was a young English tutor, and they lived together for 3 months. Now, we're 15 years down the track, absolutely nothing to stop Tim Souter getting on the phone to Charles. Hey, Charles, and they talk about how it was back in the day, and then here's the story. So, all right, Charles Spencer, why did he not come forward? There are lots of reasons why he didn't come forward. Less understandable reasons why the BBC didn't pursue him. In 1998, actually, there is evidence that he was talking about this. There's a lady called Sally Bedell-Smith, who's a sort of American doyen of biographers. He said because I think he had quite a good relationship with her, and he said, "Oh yeah, Bashir, God, what a guy! He'd tell me all these sorts of things." And she has that in her notes. You mentioned this 10-year anniversary program in 2005. Again, in the book, I detail how at that point Charles Spencer wrote to the BBC Director General,
Mark Thompson,
and said, "Look, terrible things happened back in 1995, around the time of the interview. Terrible things happened, scandalous. I've got the documentation back here in my office to prove it." And the letter was, although it went high up the chain, and we know that because we know where it went to in the BBC, he was completely rebuffed. And Charles Spencer really just took the view, well, they are, they don't want to hear this. No. You could say, should he have pressed harder when he was knocked back by the BBC at that point? Maybe he should. Maybe now what he knows about how awful things were, I think he probably thinks he should have done. But frankly, life goes on. This isn't the only thing in people's, on people's agenda. And it wasn't until 2020. And I'll wrap this up pretty soon, but it wasn't until 2020 when Charles Spencer became aware that the BBC were peddling the line. Tony Hall had peddled the line to the BBC governors that it was actually that Spencer had cooperated with Martin Bashir in the production of these fakes, that he absolutely lost it. As he said, it was absolutely outrageous. The knowledge that lie had been peddled by Hall to the governors and, talked about internally for 25 years. And that's what pushed him over the edge. And then he did come out with all his...
Yeah, well, I think you're underestimating your own role in it, because by now you're involved in your long-running research. You've years and years of trying to get access to the documents, which you did, and then you've got Spencer to trust you, and we've talked about that.
Yeah, but I am. But don't forget, I said one really important thing here, which brings this bang up to date, is that so we've heard how in 2005 Spencer writes privately, of course, to the then BBC Director General, and says terrible things happened. I've got the documents here. In 2020, just before this does publicly come to fruition, Charles Spencer again writes to a BBC Director General, the recently retired Director General, Tim Davie, and effectively says the same thing again. He says, terrible, terrible things have happened. I've got all the documents back in my office, at my stately home, etc., etc. Tim Davie replies, and the email is in the book, or at least the key paragraph. And Tim Davie's reply was this: Earl Spencer, you say, paraphrasing, you say X happened. Martin Bashir says Y happened, and we're going to go with Martin Bashir's story. And that is literally the point where Spencer said to himself, "That's it. And he went to the Daily Mail with all of his information, and they have 5 successive front pages. And it's after those stories have appeared that the BBC, Tim Davie, says, okay, yeah, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe we should have an inquiry. And I think, again, I think that is utterly scandalous. Utterly
Oh,
scandalous.
you're forgetting. I mean, we're jumping forward 15, 20 years just in the course of this conversation. During that time, the whistleblowers got persecuted, and all the people that you mentioned, especially Tony Hall, they just got the best jobs and the nice lives and the House of Lords and the seating on all the posh boards of all the arts institutions. And of course, they didn't want it all to be opened up because they'd largely built their careers on this. That you mentioned the 2005 film they made, which is so oily, the way they slapping each other on the back about how they got this interview and it was extraordinary. Yeah, so there was a lot of time went by where the truth didn't come out, and the villains of the piece, and I think they are, prospered. And you may think they're still prospering too much. In fact, I think you do, don't you?
Well, I do. I mean, had Charles Spencer's approach in 2005, even. I mean, it's not going to bring Diana back at that point. But in 2005, there was a serious prospect that the scandal could have then been brought to light. Now, uh, Tony Hall, by that point, I think I'm right in saying he became a lord in 2010. So we wouldn't have a Baron Hall of Birkenhead for sure, had it come out then. And yes, I mean, one sees people like Lord Hall, who has faced no formal sanction or even a note of censure from the
I remember my
BBC.
meeting with him. I remember it so well. And I was just covering the whole of Diana's life. I wasn't doing a big investigation on this, but I wanted to talk to him because I knew a lot of the back players. He was very smarmy, very plausible, very sort of relaxed, sophisticated guy. Yes, some things happened that weren't right, but on balance, we still think it was fine. And we had this letter from Diana, and please go away, and it's all good. And I guess I bought it.
Mm.
Because I didn't know any different. And I think he was one of these professionally incurious people who just kind of
Yeah,
followed the line of least resistance,
yeah.
led him towards where he wanted to go, like
I will.
becoming
I
a
will say to you,
baron.
Phil. I think. I mean, they have not suffered any sanction whatsoever. The people like Lord Hall, in my view, and there are reasons why I would say this in the book. Lord Burt. What I do think is this: I give them enough sensitivity, enough intelligence, and possibly even a smidgen of morality that now they are in their late 70s, their early 80s, and they're in the House of Lords, one thing and another. What must be absolutely terrible, I would imagine, to live with is the knowledge, the definite knowledge that their name will go down in history for nothing other than the terrible, scandalous part they played in these major events. I I apply to this what I call for myself the Lord North test. And you may say to yourself, what the hell is that? And it's this, that has anybody here, hands up those who've heard of Lord North? If any, you have, what was he? He was the prime minister when England, Britain lost the colonies, when
American
the American
independence.
War of Independence, right? That is the one thing that anybody, it's the one thing I know about Lord North, basically. Lord North probably had a very fruitful life with a lovely family and this, that, and the other, and did lots of important things during his premiership. The one thing if anybody knows about Lord North, it's that he lost the American colonies. If anybody in 100 years' time, 200 years' time knows anything about Lord Tony Hall, it's going to be the part he played in the taking down, the scandalous taking down of Princess Diana, the woman who should have been Queen Diana of England. And I think that, do you know what? In the wee small hours, that is not a comforting thought.
Do you distinguish between the sort of active conspirator, like, say, Martin, doing what he did and saying what he said, and the sort of passive, which I guess is what Tony Hall was, they're covering it up. They don't want to ask the hard questions. They'd rather not know the truth because it's uncomfortable and it might hurt their careers. Or do you think they're all as bad as each other?
Well, I think there is a distinction to be made there that Martin Bashir embarked upon this project with a specific aim in view. His eye was on the prize, and he followed it, and he achieved that prize. So that is different from I would suspect that people like Tony Hall began to realize what had happened, but quite quickly, did what they should not have done. So it's different. I mean, he was beginning. He was a passive victim of this. But you say to yourself, and it is a big ask. I mean, how would one self-act in these circumstances? The prospect in front of you is the worldwide shame and scandal of the corporation that is just celebrating its biggest scoop ever. So you've got worldwide scandal for the BBC, but very, very importantly, utter destruction and oblivion of one's own career. I mean, from being director of news at BBC Broadcasting House, you'd be lucky to get shifts at, with all due respect, Radio Cumbria. You know what I mean? You're done, you're finished. And that's the situation. And you've got a choice to make. And as I say, not an easy choice, but if people don't make the right choices in these circumstances, where are we? I mean, that's why people are paid the big bucks to act responsibly. And if they don't, there is no.
That's why the Director General of the BBC is the Editor in Chief of the BBC.
Yes.
And is meant to uphold its highest standards. And this is the thing that you've exposed. I mean, we could talk all day. We've had nearly an hour. Is there one more thing you'd like to say about, I know you're a fan of the BBC, and the BBC gets a lot of criticism. And I got a sense from hearing you speak at your book launch, you felt slightly guilty of piling in on the BBC when it has so many other enemies. But what would your final words of advice be to the next Tim Davie over this story in particular?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're quite right, Phil. I'm absolutely aware that there are people who will sort of use the stuff in my book as ammunition with which to bash the BBC. My position is I wish that ammunition, I wish that ammunition were not there. I wish it were not there. But, as a journalist, are you in a position where you're saying, look, it's absolutely dreadful what's happened, but it's really, really dreadful, and I can't report it for that reason? I don't think so, because the people then who have done what they've done and indeed are still doing what they're doing are given license to carry on doing it. I put it this way: it's like it's like the England footy team. I love them. I love to watch them play and win and so on and so forth. But if they have such a dreadful management regime that they keep losing, 8-0 to the Faroe Islands and Andorra and San Marino, there comes a point where you've got to say, get rid of the manager, get a new manager here. But importantly, I'm shouting from the home stand.
Yeah.
It's my team, it's my BBC that this has been done to. How dare you do this to the BBC, which I worked for and was brought up as a kid watching and revering, etc. How dare you do this? How dare you sort of, Tim Davie, currently the ex-DG, who, people sort of mockingly say, he was just a marketing man. And I say, well, for heaven's sake, the marketing man who has driven the BBC brand absolutely off a cliff, If he wants to be given a pass because he was not a journalist and his expertise was in marketing, I'm saying to myself, my God, there is nothing good that it seems to me has come from this. Do you know? Anyway, your question was anything? No, I hope that a new DG, and importantly for me, actually a new chairman, not a chairman like Samir Shah, who was thoroughly thoroughly engaged at the top of the management chain at exactly this period. I mean, you had John Burt, Tony Hall, and then effectively Samir Shah. And I'd be fascinated to hear from Mr. Shah exactly where he was when all these so-called woefully ineffective inquiries were taken. Was he not hearing it? I don't know. So a new DG, which we are going to have, and I would like to see a new chairman as well, and to come in and, as I say in the book, do the new American President JFK files thing and say, hey, we're going to open the archives once and for all, and we're going to show everybody what's there. That's what it needs. Just with the archives that have been weeded of all the smoking guns, is there more in there? Can we find
they
out?
should give you a call and say, come in, have what are you like?
Well, they
See
should.
if there's anything else. We're totally open. They won't.
No, I don't know whether we mentioned this on our first chat, Phil, but if I have, forgive me, but the story that for me just sums all this up and puts it in a little envelope is this, and that's that the BBC has now, I became aware quite recently, fired its official institutional historian. They've said no more official institutional history. No more will this person be allowed to go in the archives and study them and write an analytical piece. That is utterly, utterly disgraceful. But once you realize that the history of this particular period is so toxic, it can't be written by, the person whose job it previously was to do these things. I mean, that's crazy. Once you know that, you're into kind of Stalinist photoshopping photographs. I mean, again, I don't want to go into too long, but the current situation is, I'm pleased to say, my book, fantastically, has had literally worldwide publicity. All over this country, TV stations, podcasts, etc. Your great program in America, ABC, Good Morning Television, newspapers everywhere. Even I was pleased to see a discussion in the leading French language newspaper in Gabon, in West Africa, right?
Amazing.
So it's well covered.
I'm
well
so
covered.
pleased for you.
Well covered. What media organization has not covered it on TV or radio?
Let me guess.
It begins with B.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness.
So do you know what? So as I say, we're into kind of Stalin territory here. We've got the history, it's been cancelled, and the news. If we can, we're going to cancel that as well. And that, no, come on, BBC, come on.
Well, in the unlikely event they ask me to be the next Director General, I'll be on the phone to you very quickly.
Yeah. Well, they need me replace the official historian.
Well, no, you'll be good at that too.
I'm here.
All right. I'm going to say thank you and goodbye. And thank you from my heart, really, because we haven't really mentioned it last time, the harm that was done to some really good people who didn't know, Patrick Jephson being one and others on the Panorama team, who didn't know until you came along what had really happened. And that is something that many people, myself included, will always be grateful to you for. Thank you, Andy, for your time.
Thank you, Phil.
You're a star. Bye. Well, thank you for staying with it. It's been a long show. It's been a long 2 shows, but I've really enjoyed talking to Andy, and I particularly enjoyed his book launch when they were in my stick. But it was, it was great catching up with him, and yeah, you can see he's got a lot of righteous anger in him about what could have happened, what should have happened, and could Diana have been saved in the sense of, had she been told in '96 that the BBC knew all these things and how she'd been misled, would that have changed the way she regarded, say, Jephson? I don't know. It might have done, but they didn't. And then it took Andy many, many years to ferret it all out. And actually, he didn't even tell that story. If you're interested, he tells it in an earlier episode of this podcast a couple of years ago, how it took him all these years to get the documents, and the BBC fought him and fought him and fought him. And it turns out they were just doing it to cover up their own embarrassment and the fact that some of their most senior people really did the wrong thing. did the wrong thing when they could have done the right thing. Anyway, enough of this. Between now and Christmas, there'll be one more show. I'm going to talk to Guy Walters about, we haven't quite formalized it yet, but the slightly kind of salacious side of research into the Nazis and the Nazis' sex lives. And maybe more than that, actually, the famous story of how Hitler may have been lacking in certain areas of his male physique, put it that way, and how that actually was a kind of a part of the intelligence war. I think it's quite interesting, an unusual take, quite funny as well on World War II, which, as you know, is something that I'm interested in. And then I'm going to have a Christmas special, which will be either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and got something quite exciting with that, which I'm not going to tell you about, but I hope it'll be a nice surprise. And for those of you who are at home at Christmas, over the Christmas period, a nice long show, a review of the year, a lot of chat, and an interesting story, and a special guest. I'm not telling you who it is. So, thanks very much for your time and your attention. It is getting near Christmas. If any of you are feeling inclined to give tiny presents to your favourite podcasts, do consider us. We always accept, there's a button somewhere you can press to make a small donation, all gratefully received. You can also like and subscribe and comment and spread the word. It's been another great year. We just approached 1.4 million downloads. That's 1.4 million across audio and video in just 3 years. It's pretty good going, I'd say. For all of you who've been part of that 1.4 million, I know it wasn't just my mother-in-law. Thank you, and I'll see you all very soon. Take care. Oh, and by the way, we're still losing at the cricket. Come on, Australia, let us win one game. Bloody hell. All right, bye. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.